As the war in Ukraine drags on, concerns are now growing about potential cyber attacks from Russia here in the United States. U.S. officials warn the Kremlin is preparing to launch a new generation of cyber attacks on American soil. Experts say everything from public transit to banks and the energy sector, they all could be targeted. For more, I want to bring in Lindsay Gorman. She's an Emerging Technologies Fellow at the Alliance for Securing Democracy. Lindsay, thank you so much for being with us. We really appreciate it. You know, when you start looking at everything we do, even minute by minute, going to the ATM, going to the grocery store, you know, the lights on in this building, how could Russian cyber attacks really disrupt all of our infrastructure? And are there any sectors that I'm listing out right now that potentially are more vulnerable than others?
Absolutely. As this conflict evolves and the tools of war are really broadening, the specter of cyber attack, which is something we've been worried about and which has been on the radar from the start, is becoming more and more likely. The intelligence that U.S. government officials have been warning about are specifically about Russian cyber attacks targeting the energy and the finance sectors, which would be something of a tit for tat in response to U.S. and allied economic sanctions on Russia. And these attacks could be of a crippling nature across industrial systems. And we really only have to look to recent history to see what they could look like. Ukraine itself has just fended off an attack designed at knocking out power to over 2 million people. It has a history of sustaining cyber attacks on the energy sector. So we're talking about blackouts, disruptions, financial disruptions to our markets from what is a very sophisticated cyber actor in Russia. You know, last month, the Department of Justice had charged 4 Russian hackers with targeting the energy sectors in 135 countries and causing 2 emergency shutdowns. So that's sectors from nuclear power to oil and gas to power transmission companies. And the goal would really be this retaliation for the crippling sanctions that the U.S. and allies have imposed.
And that's what people have been talking about, that they're concerned about, is that the more we do to them, then potentially they could do something to us. You know, that attack that you were talking about in Ukraine, the thing that struck me about that is that the Russians broke in, they sat on it for a while, they watched how the systems worked, and then they attacked. Now, I know the U.S. Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Agency says that Russian state actors are preparing to attack some of our most critical systems. Do you think this is why they haven't unleashed a major cyber attack yet? Do we need to be worried that they've been going into some of our systems and taking a look around like they did in Ukraine?
Well, that's sort of the way these sophisticated attacks work. If you're robbing a bank, you're going to case the joint first. And so I think that's how we can understand these sort of probing of our systems, trying to find the vulnerabilities. But it's certainly an interesting question, you know, why haven't we seen these attacks that have been on the radar for some time? And I think there are a couple of reasons. I mean, the first of which is really that these attacks would be seen as a provocation in a way that goes beyond the invasion of Ukraine and targets those helping Ukraine. And for the first half of this conflict, we've really seen Russia push a narrative that says this is a special military operation, this isn't an invasion, this isn't an aggressive act. And as that narrative really has failed in the world opinion, and as the world has united around Ukraine, I think that narrative becomes less and less tenable outside Russia. And that's where we might see these other tools in the toolkit that would be more aggressive potentially being used. And that's why I think there is more of an imminence to a potential Russian cyber attack. I think also Russia and Putin have probably hoped that there might be some sort of negotiation that would involve the ceding of a significant amount of Ukrainian territory to Russia. And certainly attacking those that would potentially broker that settlement using cyber means would make that less and less likely. But as I said, as the world is really uniting around Ukraine, as that seems less likely, the risk of a cyber attack really does go up.
Yeah, and working in this business, you know, it's something when we talk cyber attacks, I worry about it. We have to live our life, you know, we have to go on. But can you help people understand who maybe don't think about this all the time, have to talk about this all the time? Does the U.S. have a robust capability to respond to cyber attacks from Russia if they do so occur?
Yeah, it's an interesting point you bring up, and I would think about it in 2 ways. One is sort of what are our defensive systems to defend against these attacks and mitigate the impact on our critical infrastructure. And then two is how can we respond potentially offensively? How can we punish those potential attack? And on the first point, I think we're really about to see a stress test of the Biden administration's attempt to bolster cyber capabilities, really in the wake of the SolarWinds attack, also perpetrated by Russia over a year ago. We have 2 new positions and also a tripartite command structure with CISA, Department of Homeland Security, a new position at the National Security Council, a deputy for cybersecurity and emerging technology, and a brand new White House office, the Office of the National Cyber Director, that is set up specifically to bolster the nation's cyber defenses. So if we do see a Russian attack, this will be a really strong stress test of our defensive systems and whether the policies and the new offices put in place can coordinate quickly enough with the private sector that is often the first wave of these attacks to really stop their flow. And then on the second point, on the question of what could we do to respond, I would say we're really in uncharted territory. We have never seen a global cyber war, and what the escalation dynamics of that entail is really an open question. Certainly, the United States has a very significant cyber arsenal and significant cyber capabilities that we have not really unleashed in a way that would potentially be contemplated should there be a significant Russian attack. But things like taking parts of Russia off the internet, or creating disruptions, would be within the U.S. capabilities. I think the question, which is probably one that's of interest to theorists as well, is sort of what are the norms that are going to evolve should there be a tit-for-tat cyber conflict? And like I said, it's really uncharted territory because we have not seen this before.
So at this point, prepare, don't panic, and we'll wait to see what happens.
Yeah, I think for individuals, especially if you work in a critical infrastructure sector, just be a little bit extra careful. Be careful not to click on that suspicious link. Use your 2-factor authentication. Do your updates. Live your lives, and be slightly extra careful on the cyber front. But this is certainly something that is evolving and is potentially imminent, but for the everyday citizen, I think it's really hard to predict how it's going to impact your life specifically.
All good information. Lindsay Gorman, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.